Hello and welcome back to the Nas Metal production channel here at YouTube. Welcome to another album of the week. This, of course, is episode number 53. So, for today's album of the week spotlight, to coincide with the 40th anniversary of the untimely passing of the late AC/DC frontman Bon Scott, who of course had passed away on February 19th, 1980, which the 19th was on a Wednesday. I decided to spotlight a AC/DC album this week, and it won't be the last time. Next week I'll definitely be I'll get to that later on within here, but. So the AC/DC album that I decided to kind of coincide with it is, of course, Let There Be Rock. Now, I easily could have also picked Power Edge, or I could have picked Dirty Deeds, Thunder Cheap, or even High Voltage, the original Australian one. However, the reason I picked Let There Be Rock is, for one, I mean, yes, this is definitely one of everyone's, of course, favorite, and definitely one of AC/DC's more, popular albums from the Bon Scott era. But the reason why I picked it is more so on a personal level. This was, while I was definitely more familiar at the time with Highway to Hell when I was growing up. Was it like late 90s, early 2000s, I was very, very much aware of albums like Highway to Hell, and of course Ball Breaker, which was still, and of course Stiff Upper Lip, which I'll later get on to. However, I didn't really give much of Highway to Hell a listen until very much later on. But my first time ever listening to a Bon Scott era AC/DC album was actually Let There Be Rock, and it was just like 2003. I just remember my dad he did the BMG orders for Flick of the Switch and Let There Be Rock because at the time they did the Digipack remasters, and goddamn, I mean, I loved those two albums. I mean, I played Flick of the Switch quite a bit. I mean, that was probably my second Brian Johnson era AC/DC album that I actually listened to. My first was Ball Breaker, but this was my very first, my true introduction to the Bon Scott era of AC/DC, because again, I remember checking out a little bit of Highway to Hell, but I didn't give that album a full listen. It was Let There Be Rock would end up taking the throne of being the first Bon Scott era AC/DC album that I ever heard. And I mean, listening to the two albums, I mean, I loved both of them, both Flick of the Switch and Let There Be Rock, but at the same time, I do know, however, every time I did, it was like almost the way it's so noticeable how different both albums sound. It's like almost listening to two different bands. One's got out a more, I mean, one has, Flick of the Switch has a more, I guess you can, I wouldn't say flat, but it just definitely kind of is very typical of a more 80s kind of raw, all sort of a more electric, more almost bigger kind of sound. Very, very typical, at least, of a hard rock or at times early metal album from 1982 or 1983 and 84. You know, kind of like that. Very typical of that kind of style. Or it's not Let There Be Rock. It's got more of an even rougher, more raw, and definitely more distorted and fuzzier production That's definitely more geared towards especially the Angus and Malcolm's guitar tone, which just sounds like a chainsaw on this album. It just buzzes through, and it just is able to kind of bring the album to life. I mean, the title of the album is "Let There Be Rock," and the album lives up to it because it definitely rocks, and the production really gives it a more electrifying and more. I guess it's very it's corny and kind of and not quite as clever, but high voltage. It definitely has a very high voltage feel to this album, and I'm not just trying to compare it to the album High Voltage, but just as the overall tone and the overall atmosphere and just the overall sound of the album, and even the attitude. I mean, this is, of course, I mean, this was, I mean, they had just 3 albums out prior to this. I mean, High Voltage, TNT, and Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, of course, didn't get released here in the States until 1981, but it was definitely over in Australia and the rest of the part of Europe. It was released, and of course, in Australia, Dirty Deeds was their 3rd full-length album. So this was their 4th. And in many ways, you really can. I mean, each album you can definitely go. If you were to check out the first 2 Australian-only albums, then of course going to Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, you can just hear how progressively more louder and more sonic that the band just got with each record. And then you just get the Let There Be Rock, and it just is the pretty much basically, in a way to describe the album, is basically the band literally on fire. They're just fucking hammering through 8 fucking tracks. I mean, there's some slower parts. I mean, it's more mid-tempo and at times more slower songs on the album. But it just, in a way, the overall tone, like it's basically the band just on a mission at just being the most loudest, most hardest, and most, I guess, even in a way, most obnoxious, hard rock and roll band. Like this band's mission was basically being the most outrageous rock and roll band there was. I mean, and this album, in a way, is a testament to that. It's definitely that kind of, and it's just it definitely for sure lives up to the band at this point. Band's reputation are definitely being one of the most really good up and coming rock and roll bands, and of course, and to this day, is still considered a classic, and because of those many reasons. But enough of the overall attitude of the. I mean, enough to talk about. Let's definitely get into the song, which of course will then lead into me talking about the various 2 different versions of this sound, as far as like 2 pressings when it comes to at least the track listing. But since of course right now I'm just basing right now off the more standard American version of the album, and not really the European and Australian version of the album, which the track listing for both the Australian and European aren't that different. But what's really different is, of course, going into the American pressing. But right now, I mean, what way to start an album off with of course, Go Down, which for sure is definitely a fucking boogie of a track. I mean, of course, the more the rebellious anthem of Dog Eat Dog, to, of course, the title track, which is to me in many ways is also can be seen as one of the earliest speed metal tunes. I mean, goddamn, the riff to that beginning opening riff, or that main riff in Let There Be Rock. I mean, while technically everyone still considers AC/DC a hard rock band, even some will say even back in the 70s they weren't really nearly as metallic sounding compared to other sort of early heavy metal bands. However, the song Let There Be Rock, you can't tell me that at the song Let There Be Rock, or at least the riff to it, you can't tell me that isn't the most thrashiest riff for 1977. I mean, the only other band that definitely was able to kind of top at least the song and the album in terms of just pure, in terms of loud speed and aggression, would be Motorhead, which of course both Let There Be Rock from AC/DC and Motorhead's self-titled album were released on the same year, and in many ways you can definitely say that Motorhead were definitely the band that was like an even more of an upscale from AC/DC in terms of just being loud and obnoxious and just wild. They were like the next step up. But even for 1977, the riff to like Let There Be Rock was one hell of an aggressive romp. Just a great tune. And of course, then we too definitely have the Ribhead Boogie of Bad Boy Boogie, which is definitely another great tune off this album. But that of course ends off side one. Side two. This is where we get to at least the difference between the Australian / European pressings and the American pressings. On the Australian European pressings of this album, the difference between these two, besides of course the artwork, I mean the Australian pressing, you definitely can tell there it's a different cover, and it's definitely not the cover that everyone is at least used to. It's like just a sort of plain black, I guess in a way I wouldn't say very grainy cover of basically the neck of a guitar with of course in the background probably Angus's fingers and stuff. But then of course everyone is, and then of course both the American and European pressings of the album has the very recognizable and iconic cover, which of course was basically a painting of the band on stage, with of course then also bearing the right now still the most iconic logo or band logo in all of hard rock history, as of course is the typical AC/DC logo, which of course was only for a little while was only used on this album until Highway to Hell, because prior to that they always had different logos that was kind of used on their albums. But Let There Be Rock was the first one that gave a little bit of hint on what would eventually become their signature band logo. But again, the difference doesn't just stop there. It's within the track listing that ends up being different. Because again, the song that does open up side two is Overdose, which of course is, to me, almost kind of melodic tune, and of course the way it starts out is a little bit more epic and almost grandiose in ways. The way it just opens up, with of course with almost those kind of slight, bluesy kind of scales or so, before then going into definitely again just a great rock and roll track. But the lyrics, of course, I think for the long again people were just brushing it off as just your typical sex tune from lyricist Bon Scott. However, if it wasn't for me watching or listening to Chris Jericho's podcast about 2 years ago, I believe it was 2 years ago, I forgot who the author was, but I know at the time, I can't forget, but one of the author, he had this author on who apparently was I think it was a British author, I believe, or an American author. I can't remember what kind of, but he was doing on the band in a way, and of course it was at the Life of Bon Scott, and apparently in here they're actually in a way kind of opened up my eyes to the whole lyrics, and in a way changed my whole outlook on the song Overdose. Basically. And of course, it seems to come into like almost a conspiracy theory around Bon Scott's death, and apparently both the members, Phil Mogg and I think Paul Chapman, I believe, the members at the time of UFO have actually for sure seem to verify this theory around Bon Scott's death, but. It's a fact that the theory is that he didn't really not just drink and just uh, died on choking on his own vomit from just drinking. It's been said that apparently he actually might have overdosed from heroin. And the thing is, this wasn't the only account of that. Apparently, there were two prior uh, overdoses or Bon Scott's overdose. There's been two accounts. First account was actually, and both of these two were verified by one of the managers, or at least I think for sure one of the former managers for ACDC. First account was actually around 1976, right around the time I think Dirty Deeds Done Cheap was about to be recorded. I know prior to that there was an account of them going into a studio to record like a 4-track EP, which at least two of those songs or one of those songs would eventually will end up being B-sides, and of course later be added to even the European pressing of Power Edge. But anyways, during that time, apparently Bon Scott had an overdose. I forgot what kind of overdose it was, if it was on what kind of drug, but it definitely was, and it almost got him kicked out. The second account was around the time of this album, Let That Be Rock. Since, of course, during this time, they also were venturing up to the UK to do some tours and even do some gigs around there. And apparently, again, it seemed like Bon Scott was probably hanging around. Again, Phil Mogg and Paul Chapman have definitely verified this. And of course, definitely leads into the person who they believe, who of course at least called in the report for Bon Scott's death. They've believed to have definitely been a heroin dealer, who apparently Bon Scott was definitely hanging around with, and was definitely buddies with, or at least ended up becoming friends with. So it kind of leads into that. But the thing is, when again going to the UK, the most, according to of course Phil Mogg and Paul Chapman, they said that they're basically the most popular drug, basically, for the rock scene or the within Britain, at least when it comes to the underground, was of course heroin, which is probably where guys like Phil Lynott and so on probably ended up getting hooked on it, and so it's definitely kind of something that Bon Scott is also one of those that actually ended up getting lumped in there for. Or at least one of those artists that actually did. I mean, and again, it even doesn't stop at those accounts. It even apparently even as far as footage, apparently again some fans accounts that have seen interviews during those last few months of Bon Scott, and of course some of the live shows around that time, they've definitely noticed that Bon Scott's look was definitely changing, and his whole performance and even behavior was all changing. From of course he was getting a little fatter. Apparently he was definitely getting out of shape, and of course they've noticed how even around his eyelids were noticed that just something just didn't look right, and even accounts of even him basically almost bringing out a towel basically where he seemed like he might have puked on. And of course to even him just basically almost looking dizzy, almost not knowing knowing where the fuck he even was on stage. So I mean, I remember hearing a story many years ago how apparently one of my dad's friends actually seeing a car, things did, and apparently again just him being very off, and it had to have been around the time of the last leg of the Highway to Hell tour. So it's really kind of, and it's just crazy. But in a way, a lot of these accounts of just him having overdose, and then ended up coming that he might have actually overdosed that night, that he that it wasn't just. I mean, it's very possible that he easily could have been also drinking and doing it at the same time, which of course makes more sense. But the thing is, of course, then it comes to going to the different timestamps, because apparently uh, Paul and Phil apparently did send someone out there to, was it around very early in the morning. It had to be like 10 or 11 o'clock or so to go out there to check on him. Apparently they did, but they didn't seem to care to report it right there to the authorities that Bon Scott passed away. But that's where so they didn't. But then a few hours later, around 2 o'clock, or was it no 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, it ended up getting reported. And again, by the person who did, they definitely seemed to have their seem to verify that the guy who did that reported it was and supposed friend of Bon Scott was a heroin dealer, and that's why and of course some will say that there's no way. And when the report says that he probably just choked on his vomit, I mean the person, I mean, I don't want to make this too fucking long and make it almost too much about some fucking conspiracy theory, but I mean, to kind of go on, I mean, if that's very much true and there wasn't any evidence left there that traces Bon Scott, overdosing on heroin, and of course the person who reported it, and who is supposedly, again, according to Phil and Paul, that was verified known heroin dealer within the underground parts of the UK. I mean, if he was one that reported, he could have easily. From the different timestamps, I mean, he could have easily had time to remove any traces of him because of man. I mean, if the person that Phil Mogg and Paul Chapman had sent out to actually check on Bon Scott and did notice that he wasn't that he was dead and didn't report at that time. And if there was some stuff that was in the car that just looked suspicious, they could have easily traced any of those evidence probably back to the heroin dealer, and he probably would have been, the authorities would have got him. So, since of course, Phil, the guy they sent out originally, it didn't do that. It basically gave the other guy, the person who did actually report it in, enough time to remove any traces of him, to have anything fall back at him. So that's kind of it. It's a crazy fucking thing, but to me, where we go back to the song "Overdose" and listening to the lyrics here and actually kind of paying more attention and the innuendo and the whole sort of meaning behind it, it really kind of opens. It kind of really just kind of gets your eyes open up a bit and actually almost just like think like fuck. It's like shit. I don't think it's like it makes you think he's not referring to to some woman. He's referring to in the song to heroin. It's Overdose is basically about Bon Scott's unhealthy addiction to heroin. That's apparently it is, and it just makes the song a little more darker, and it, of course, in a way, plays into what definitely probably killed Bon Scott. So it's almost like like a real hidden message in a way. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, for a band like AC/DC, who are these, to everyone, to the eyes of them, were never really looked as a band that did drugs or anything. I mean, yeah, they smoked cigarettes, but given how that's probably the most commercially viable drug they're out there, and it's not really an illegal drug, is in a way, I guess you say, removes any of those kind of those factors of what people can see, when they look at rock bands, especially back in the 70s, as the whole sort of lifestyle of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Well, apparently, seems like Bon Scott was one that definitely seemed to have lived by it, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So it's a very much a really sort of crazy and almost at times very fascinating, but still very sad way of putting it, of outlook for that. But yeah, it's an eye opener. However, again, so I definitely kind of went on a little tangent there for the sort of some sort of, the said conspiracy theory or so around that, and what makes a conspiracy theory is the fact that apparently Not just the person who fucking called it in, who reported the death of Bon Scott to the authorities, but even the fact that apparently the band members have possibly did their best to cover it up, and then of course it leads into the conspiracy theory on if whether or not if Bon Scott actually did write some of the songs for Back in Black and not really Brian Johnson. Of course, it then goes into conspiracy theory whether or not Bon Scott actually did come up with most of the lyrics to "You Shook Me All Night Long," which it goes into it, which I'm not gonna go. I'll probably say that for again whenever I do Maybe if I'll talk about that whenever I do spotlight Back in Black. And of course, we'll hit its 40th anniversary this year too. It'll be July 25th. That's definitely a whole other months ago. But that definitely, I just went on a little tangent there. But that's definitely get back. So Overdose was the song that definitely were originally kicked off side 2 for both the Australian and European pressings of this album. However, this is where we get to the different part because of the track that would follow Overdose was a song called Crapsody in Blue, which the reason I think which was again, it's a very slow bluesy track. I mean, there are parts where it definitely kind of tends to pick up a bit, but the reason this probably really kind of got left off or was removed from the American pressings for the Let There Be Rock was because of the lyrical content. I mean, of course, Bon Scott, going back to him, was definitely somebody that always definitely tried to throw in as much humor into at least his album and definitely put a lot of his personality. Hence probably why we just talked. I just went through a whole, basically have most of this video talking about the song Overdose and how it seems to really reflect his heroin and his somewhat the heroin addiction of Bon Scott, which is something that's not very well widely spoken about. And just went on through that in a sense, of course, again, Bon Scott really likes to throw a lot of his personality and his personal life story almost into a lot of the song, which is why what really livened up the music and really kind of just really which made at least the songs come to life. I mean, Angus and Malcolm, they had the riffs. They had at least the riff ideas and some of that. And of course, Phil Rudd probably definitely had the drum composing ideas. And of course, at this point, the original bass player here, which was Mark Evans, he of course would have at least maybe some slight bass ideas. But it was Bon Scott that definitely came up with most of the lyrics. And he was definitely the one that for sure whenever given, would take full control of the lyrics and just add every bit of his personality and his whole heart and soul into those songs. And again, with the song like Crapsody in Blue, he definitely it definitely was one of those that really kind of showcased his humorous side, even though it might be politically incorrect at this point. Which was the song was about the problems of crabs, which is actually titled here Crab Loose, which is according to Wikipedia, is an insect that is an obligate ectoparasite of humans, feeding exclusively on blood. The crab loose usually is found in the person's pubic hair, and of course in this case the pubic hair that probably Bon Scott's referring to is probably the female fucking pubic hair. So kind of which was probably a little bit too explicit, probably because again, since probably many people over in America probably aren't completely aware of crab loose, or at least aware of the little insect that what it is, or not so aware of what it is because I don't know how much of an outbreak epidemic fucking crab loose is in those parts of the state, but. And so I don't know how many people are more smart enough to realize that the song Crapsody in Blue is probably about that, but yet somehow, the people over Atlantic probably realized, were probably smart enough to realize what the song is about, and removing the song from the American pressings for this album. But still, Instead, in its place is a shortened version of the song "Problem Child," which of course here in the States, "Dirty Deeds Done Cheap" wasn't released. Again, it wouldn't be released here in the States officially until 1981, just a year after Bon Scott's death. But so prior to that, I think here in the States, it seemed like some people were like thinking that Problem Child was again only a song from Let That Be Rock, but until Dirty Deeds Done Cheap was released in the States, it probably ended up creating a little bit of confusion. This is where I probably bring in a little bit of rant now on the remasters, or at least the CD remasters for this, which basically copies every bit of the American version of the album, and especially even when the album was then reissued in Europe. It still went by the American track listing instead of going by the track listing that probably the Europeans were fucking used to, which would contain the song "Crapsy and Blue." So talk about pure fucking redundancy when fucking Let That Be Rock gets released on CD, bearing at least the cover that at least is found most on the European and American pressings of the album, but yet contains the fucking American pressing, which includes a shortened version of the song "Problem Child." But then, of course, a part of the American, or at least the CD reissues for this album, contain both Dirty Deeds and the Cheap is included, and that album is, of course, it goes by the European and American track listing includes Problem Child. So basically, you got two CDs basically with the same fucking track on both albums. Pure fucking redundancy. I mean, it was a real missed opportunity to actually revert the CD reissue or Let There Be Rock and revert it back to the European track listing. So it was stupid. It's by far the most redundant fucking thing I've seen record labels do over the years. I mean, it was ridiculous. But there you've got, of course, that track, and of course, then you've got the rather sleazy sexual boogie of "Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be," which for the longest time I think in the minds of a lot of Christians probably thought, before, of course, the whole there's a satanic panic with songs like "Highway to Hell" and songs like Hell's Bells that would come on those two albums. That would begin. I think for even this might be one of the earliest reports, maybe because the fact that the song is called "Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be." However, the song has really nothing to do with Satan or anything. I mean, the song "Highway to Hell." I mean, I talked about it anyways, and I discussed about it in my album of the year or album of the week spotlight of "Highway to Hell" last year. To coincide with that album's 40th anniversary, but I was pretty much discussing how even that song had nothing to do with Satan. It was just, again, it was about touring. That's all it was about. It was about the sort of the real tough and hellacious bit of touring, which again at times can be almost stressful. But again, the band was able to take to put those aside and soldier on to at least get to the cities to kind of give their audience, audience and everything, a good show. But the song here, "Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be," ain't about fucking Satan. It's about a stripper. It's again just another one of Bon Scott's personality being put into the song. He always just had a way of throwing even one of those sex type songs, and this is definitely one of them. It's about a fucking stripper, and of course, you end it with another sleazy track. But again, probably the most popular, besides "Let That Be Rock" on here, is still one of the most popular fucking tracks from AC/DC. It's still a song that is always played at every AC/DC show, and that's of course "Whole Lotta Rosie," which of course again is a bit about a big chubby woman. That's what it is, and I guess you can say you can definitely for sure say that Bon Scott was, of course, had a thing for, of course, bigger women. Didn't care what their size was, but before it even became a thing, because over the years it was all about it. Really, you had to fit this for women, at least for people to actually at least look at women. You had to at least be this certain size. All be about this. Of course, these days when it comes to models, everyone wants that supermodel. But I guess you can say Bon Scott's the first one to say, "Fuck that! I don't care what kind of size you are." As long as you make me feel happy is all that matters in a song like fucking Whole Lot of Love. I mean, Whole Lot of Rosie. Well, um, it pretty much reflects that. It's about it doesn't matter what fucking size you are. So definitely, just another again, it's another classic staple within ACDC's concert. However, originally the song "Whole Lot of Rosie" was originally recorded as "Dirty Eyes." Actually, it was originally a song called "Dirty Eyes," which of course was again one of the songs I was actually originally what was recorded for that supposed 4-track EP before they scrapped it, which I'm wondering if it had anything to do with the somewhat second overdose from Bon Scott, which again Bon Scott survived too, and yet died on the third one. Again, third time's a charm. But who knows if it had anything to do with that. So without further ado, this is definitely one of the longest album of the week videos I've done so far. I mean, I went through a whole lot the conspiracy theories surrounding the overall what the song Overdose is probably what is about. I went through also this various different pressings between this, and of course going to a little deep account of this or about the song Craps in Blue and what it's about, and what led to Atlantic removing the song from the American pressing for at least the Actgo record pressing, because again, if it was again the Atlantic and Albert pressings both contain the song Crabsy and Blue. So that definitely one of my favorite ACDC albums, and definitely the album that for sure turned me on to at least the Bon Scott era of ACDC. So that definitely a great album. Next week, I will be spotlighting Stiff Upper Lip to coincide with its 20th anniversary, which again, 20 years at this point now since the album Stiff Upper Lip has been released. And of course, a month down the road, July 25th, I'll then, of course, spotlight Back in Black. And then September 24th, I'll spotlight The Razor's Edge. Back in Black will be hitting its 40th anniversary, and Razor's Edge will be hitting its 30th anniversary. So plenty of ACDC albums here that are actually are reaching their anniversary pick. So again, Stiff Upper Lip, Back in Black, and The Razor's Edge. So that, hope you all enjoyed. If you definitely, what were your thoughts anyways on this album? I know plenty of you are very much familiar with this album. So with that, let me know in the comment section below. This is Heavy Thrasher Sam out, and I'll see you all again here real soon. Take care, everyone.